So I'm going to tell you, I know that Gary is going to do an outstanding job, but you're not going to enjoy it as much as I enjoyed it when I heard it. Because I'm just going to tell you, whenever you're hearing about the Ten Commandments, there's something about hearing that at the base of Mount Sinai that you just can't replicate here in Columbus, Ohio. The content may be the same, but the ambience is a little bit different. This, by the way, was why Peggy and I just decided we have to get Gary to come and share this with our congregation. It is such, both the lesson on the plagues and now this one on the Ten Commandments, it is just so meaningful, and he does such an outstanding job with it. I know you'll be blessed by it. Here.
Did I turn that on? That's on, right? That's high praise coming from Greg Tidwell. There are a few things to make a preacher more nervous than standing in front of Greg Tidwell and Justin Rogers. But here I am, and we'll press on together. But that's the only time I had ever been to the place in Israel called in Egypt, in the Sinai Peninsula, called Jebel Musa or St. Catherine's, which is the traditional place, the place with the oldest tradition of being the biblical Mount Sinai, which is where the Ten Commandments were given. If you go to Exodus chapter 19, you are reading a description of an almost unimaginable experience where the Israelites have come out of Egypt, they've crossed the Red Sea on dry ground, and they are now being fed with manna from God, and he leads them by cloud and fire to this mountain. And he says to them, build a barrier, build a fence, build a blockade around the mountain. Don't let anybody touch this mountain. I don't want a goat. I don't want a sheep. I don't want a bull. I don't want a camel. I don't want anybody touching this mountain except the people that I say. And he says, I'm going to descend on the mountain, and so cleanse yourselves. And so they cleanse themselves. And God descends on the mountain with power. And the people see a great smoke. They see a great cloud. They see blackness. The earthquakes, fire, and light are coming from the mountain. And from this quaking, burning, smoking, do not touch it mountain, they hear the actual voice of God. God speaks to probably a couple of million people in human language, all at the same time, with this overwhelming force and power. Before we look at the actual contents of the Ten Commandments, I want you to think about what the New Testament says about the law that was given to Moses, which includes the Ten Commandments. Galatians chapter 3, verse 24, the law has become our tutor to lead us to Christ so that we may be justified by faith. But now that faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. The New Testament pictures the Old Testament as preparatory school, right? The time where you are given the basic instructions of all of the different subjects that you need to understand to conduct a healthy and successful life. And then when you get to a certain maturity level, you're then given the freedom of the fullness of life, the freedom of the fullness of adulthood. The Israelites were given the preparatory instruction of carrying on a relationship with a holy God that brought in the circumstances by which God himself could take on human flesh and offer the ultimate sacrifice for sin and create a union between a holy God and a sinful humanity. But to do that, they had to be instructed. And so one of the ways to think about the Old Testament is to think about instructions for your children. Always hold somebody's hand when you cross the street. And then they get a little bit older and you say, well, look both ways before you cross the street. And then they get a little bit older and say, you can go down there, but don't go any farther. And then you start saying, you can drive, but you have to be home by 8, right? And the fence just keeps getting moved a little bit as they mature. But then there are some instructions that never change. Don't steal. Respect your teachers. Respect those in authority. Always tell the truth. Wash your face, right? These rules never change. And the 10 Commandments are like that. Some people have said that the 10 Commandments are an index or a heading list for the rest of the old law. And so you read further through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and you see the ideas in the 10 Commandments developed with a lot more specific rules given later. But there are 10 of them, so we better get going. Number 1, no other gods. Exodus chapter 20, verse 2. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. That's the instruction, but the explanation is there is only one. I am the Lord your God, and there is no other God. I am the Lord your God, and you are not the Lord your God. You're not God. I am God. No other gods. You came out of Egypt. They have hundreds of gods. You're going into Canaan. They have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of gods. And each little place has its own special God. There's only one. God is here echoing what he told Moses, probably at the same mountain. That's not certain, but it looks to be the same, and there's biblical evidence that it is. Moses says, who shall I say has sent me? And God says, I am that I am. Tell them I am has sent you. God says, I exist. I am real. I am the foundation of reality. God makes a claim to objective truth. I am the Lord your God. I'm not like those you make up in your mind. I'm not like those that you control and decide what's going to happen. I'm real, and I speak, and I make mountains quake. You better not have anything that you think competes with me. Objective truth. Jesus says in John 8:32, you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Did you know that science makes no sense without God? Do you know ethics was originally a part of the theology department? Because they make no sense without God. Science claims to be a pursuit of truth. I am all for the pursuit of truth, scientific, ethical, and otherwise. But why would truth matter? Truth matters only if truth is. Truth matters only if there is an objective reality that can be studied and observed and measured and learned from. If there is no orderly, intelligent creator of reality, then there is no orderly, intelligent truth to be uncovered, to be discovered. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. This is the foundation of everything else. Why should I not hit my sister? Because it's wrong. Well, what makes it wrong? God does. And he is the bottom of the answer to all of the trees of question that you can climb down. I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, no idols. Sounds a lot like the first one. Seems important that God seems to repeat himself, but he doesn't really repeat himself. He just gets a little bit more specific and puts a little bit different spin on it, or a little bit different angle from which he's coming at the same idea, similar idea. Exodus chapter 20, verse 4, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above or on the earth beneath or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandments. It's an interesting statement. God says that he is a jealous God. We typically think of jealousy in a negative sense. The Bible often speaks of jealousy in a negative sense, especially when it comes to envy. We'll get there at the end. But when it comes to my wife, I expect everybody else to keep a certain distance. When it comes to my children, I don't want school administrators deciding what to teach them is healthy sexual behavior. I don't want school administrators to teach them when it's okay to steal. That's my job. That's my prerogative, and I am jealous about somebody encroaching upon it. God is the same. God doesn't want anything else encroaching upon his prerogative to instruct his people and to form them into what he created them to be. And so he says, don't let anything compete with me for your attention, for your affection. C.S. Lewis used the term chronological snobbery. And if you go to Egypt, or if you go to Israel or to ancient Rome or ancient Greece, and you see all the idolatry, you'll be like maybe the Apostle Paul, where your soul is disturbed. And quite frankly, a lot of times we look at it, or we read about it, or we study it, and we think, this is really silly. How could they believe in this frog god? How could they worship a scarab beetle? But if they looked at us, how could they watch 11 men fighting over a piece of leather and think that that was the most important thing in the world? Congratulations on your national championship. It's a great, I hope it brings you happiness and joy. The Volunteers won the baseball national championship just a few months ago. I'll accept your congratulations too. But in congregational church buildings, we can get in fights over whether we should fire the coach, right? And we take these things emotional, and they're the key to whether we're happy or not. We assign them authority over our emotional well-being. That's an idol. You can laugh at the Egyptian gods, and you can laugh at the Greek gods and the Roman gods, but they would laugh at ours. Oh, you think having that brand on your shoe or on the back of your shoulder is going to make you a happier person? You've ascribed to it power that it can never exercise, and that's an idol. Romans chapter 1, verse 25, for they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. In idolatry, you can make the idol do anything you want it to do, and it's very permissive, and you can worship however you want to worship. But it's not reality. It doesn't bring you closer to the God of reality, the God who exists, the God who leads you down the right path to a better life, an eternal life. Don't let anything compete with God. For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5. Number 3, be careful with God's name. Exodus chapter 20, verse 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. Lord, have mercy. God forbid. Lord, help me. Holy moly. When you say any of those phrases, are you actually invoking the power of the almighty, ever-present, all-knowing, transcendent, unchanging, eternal God? Are you asking for his assistance or intervention? Well, one of the main instructions, one of the main principles that comes out of the instructions of Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy is the holiness of God. Anything associated with God must be treated as holy, like his name. His name must be revered, and it must never be mixed. Nothing associated with God should ever be mixed with that which is common, or especially that which is defiled. or profane. Always hold a reverential attitude toward anything associated with God. It's a principle that never changes. Absolutely never changes. Matthew chapter 5, verse 34. But I say to you, make no oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. You don't own any of these things. You can't put heaven at risk. You can't bet the earth on something. Don't presume to be able to pronounce a curse on it or to call down curses from it. That's not your authority. Respect God's authority, respect his divinity, his holiness, and never pretend to have your own authority over it. That's what Jesus is saying. Always have reverence for God. Number 4, remember God's day. This is the only one of the 10 commandments that is not referenced in the New Testament. In fact, Jesus, frequently creates fireworks by his handling of the Sabbath in the New Testament and provokes those who would try to take control of God's religion, and illustrates their hypocrisy and the emptiness of their teachings using the Sabbath and their rules that they've built around the Sabbath. But even though this instruction is not imported in the New Testament, it has some profound truth for us to appreciate even today, and for us to help understand ourselves even today. Exodus chapter 20, verse 9. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. Let's stop there for just a second. Brother Justin, I had no idea that millennials take 5 vacations a year. That's amazing. I know that Columbus is the largest city in Ohio, but I also know it's a college town, and you guys have a giant university here, and then at least one or probably more other colleges as well. And maybe this is not a problem, but in Chattanooga, we're sort of a college town. We have a pretty good university in our town, not quite as famous as yours. But if you have college kids living in your house, sometimes, and I don't mean to attack college kids here, but it just seems prevalent among a certain age group. They get up at the crack of noon, right? Well, I can't do anything until I get coffee. You want me to what? Probably a lot of that is natural to their age. Some of it certainly natural to our culture and the things that they've been taught and the things that they've seen modeled for them and the permissiveness in which they've grown up. But there is a principle written into the 10 Commandments, and it starts like this: 6 days you shall labor. Work is good for you. Some people need to hear that. But that's not the end of the principle. But the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. He's closing all the loopholes. Well, I got to stay in the house and I'm not allowed to work, but y'all go down there and plow that field and you bring in that harvest and you make sure that those animals are taken. No. Nobody. Don't delegate it. Don't try to find a way around it. 1 day a week, you don't work. Interesting. Why is it? For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. 1700s, after the French Revolution, the French decided they were going to change the length of a week. They made it 10 days. Lasted 4 or 5 years, and they're like, man, this doesn't work. After the fall of the empire in Russia, under the Bolsheviks, they said, we're going to have a 5-day week. Didn't work. 7-day week. Every other, they're the two that are known in history that have tried it. Every culture, with those very few exceptions, observe a 7-day week. It's built into the fabric of humanity. And it's written into the Ten Commandments. So we are not told to observe a Sabbath, but we are told not to trust in the uncertainty of riches. We are told to rely on God and to trust Him to provide what we need. And the Sabbath, to a people who grow their own food and raise their own food and harvest their own food and mill their own food and knead their own food and cook their own food, taking a day off feels risky. It feels like your very sustenance may be endangered. But your sustenance does not depend on you. It depends on your Creator. And so one day, every week, you need to stop and recognize your dependence on your Creator. You need to realize that you are not the key to your success. God is the key to your success, and God deserves your worship. He deserves your devotion. Now, you need to work. You need to devote yourself. You need to spend the sweat of your brow, but you need to acknowledge and worship God. So that's 4 of the 10 commandments. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9, takes the Sabbath and repurposes it in a very interesting way. There remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God, for the one who has entered his rest has himself also rested from his works as God did from his. Therefore, let us be diligent to enter that rest so that no one will fall through following the same example of disobedience. That rest that the Israelites were given 1 day a week, were given 1 year out of 7, and were given another year out of 50. Pictures a future for God's people when we will not survive by the sweat of our brow, when we will not survive by our ability to walk by faith, but we will walk by sight in the presence of God, and His presence will supply all of our needs. But until that day arrives, we must be diligent. We must be committed. We must keep Him on our minds and in our hearts. So that's the first 4 of the 10 commandments. Those first 4 about our relationship with God, about worship. No other gods before me, no idols. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Remember His name. Keep the Sabbath holy. Those are about God. Now, the last 6 turn to our relationship with people or our own personal lives. You can't draw really clear lines here, but now we turn to more of a social rather than a religious emphasis in the 10 Commandments. Starts with family. There are really 3 that impact family, but the first one is the most obvious. Honor your parents. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Honor your father and mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you. One of the biggest dangers in our culture, and I so appreciate the focus of this lectureship and the collision between Christian faith and the secular culture in which we live. But one of the biggest collisions and one of the biggest dangers of the secular culture in which we live is tearing down the foundations of the past, right? Is a disrespect for the truth and the wisdom, the instruction and the experience of those who came before. And so you have this deconstructionism, you have this rethinking and retelling and revising of all of these different pursuits of study in academia, in popular culture. I mean, you think about the movies that have come out that go back to the old fairy tales, and they take the villain from the fairy tale and make them a lot more sympathetic, right? You're taking those principles of the past and you're just tearing them apart. Old Testament teaching, New Testament teaching teaches a respect for authority. It teaches a respect for truth, a respect for wisdom, a respect for those who have gone before. And it starts with the fifth commandment. Honor your father and mother. Honor your parents. Treat your parents as important. Jesus gives really important teachings when it comes to this, but in the Proverbs you have to stand in the presence of the white-headed, right? This respect for those who have learned more, experienced more, and provided for you, taken care of you, helped you. This respect of children for parents, of children for teachers, for authority figures, and that's gotten dangerous now, right? I mean, we can put our children under the authority of people that they shouldn't respect and they shouldn't trust. It's part of the degradation of our culture. Luke chapter 2, verse 51. Jesus has been in the temple. He's holding his own with the most respected teachers in the nation of Israel. They're amazed at his insight into the law. They're amazed at his insight into the Word of God. But his mother and dad are upset. You should have told us where you are. He went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart. Respect for those who take care of you. Respect for those who have authority, who have been invested by God with authority to take care of you. It's fundamental to civilization. It starts in the family, it starts in the home, and then it builds out from there. Number 6, don't murder. Verse 13 of Exodus chapter 20, you shall not murder. King James, of course, says, thou shalt not kill. You read the rest of the old law, you read the rest of the law of Moses, even in the King James, and you realize that there are situations in which you can kill. Certain people are supposed to be put to death for capital crimes. Certain people can kill accidentally and not be punished and put to death. And so the proper understanding of the term is, in fact, murder. You shall not take life unjustifiably or without God's permission. This emphasizes in a very real way the sanctity of life. Life is important. It is valuable to God. And this is one of the big divisions that has happened as our culture moves further away from Judeo-Christianity. This is one of the flashpoints. Whether life is sacred, whether life is important. And it shows up in abortion. It shows up in how we care for the elderly. It shows up in how we deal with assisted suicide. It shows up in how we deal with people who are different than we are. How we deal with people from a different place or a different religion or a different language. They're not the same as me. And so, how do I judge their worth? How do I judge their value? Genesis chapter 9, after the flood and Noah and his family come off the ark, and Noah makes an animal sacrifice. He's only got 7 of each clean animal, and he sacrifices some of them. And this is the instruction. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. Now he's giving them animal meat as food. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. Surely I will require your lifeblood. From every beast I will require it, and from every man, and from every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. Every human being is an image bearer of God. Every human being carries the image of God. You look around this building and you see the creativity. You see the things that are painted on the wall. You see the organization of the materials for the children's classrooms. You see the people giving their time and their energy and their money to prepare food and snacks and all the things for all of us. Creativity, sacrifice, service. grace, kindness, compassion. These are reflections of God's own creative and loving character. We're all made in the image of God, and we are to respect every human life, regardless of our perception of its utility, of its value to other people. If it has the image of God, who is holy, it is to be treated as holy, and the taking of it is to be resisted and punished. Jesus takes this even further. Matthew chapter 5, verse 21, you have heard that the ancients were told, you shall not commit murder, and whoever commits murder shall be liable to the court. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court. And whoever says to his brother, you good for nothing, shall be guilty before the Supreme Court. And whoever says, you fool, shall be guilty enough to go into the fiery hell. So in the Old Testament, God tells the Israelites, you shall not commit murder. You are to respect and value every human life. In the New Testament, Jesus says, you shall not even call people's names because you respect human life. Because every human life is made in the image of God. And treating people as if they have no value, treating people if they are trash, as they are scum, as they have no value to you and no importance in your life, well, it's offensive to God. It's offensive to God because those people that you're treating like that bear God's image. And you should not treat the image of your Creator like that. And so, when you're in traffic, when somebody cuts you off, when somebody starts, making obscene gestures at you, or when you see the person on television who disagrees with everything you believe religiously and politically, saying things that you find disgusting and immoral, you're called to a higher standard. And you're required to see that person as a bearer of the image of God. Number 7, no adultery also impacts family, also impacts sexual behavior. 2 impact sexual behavior, this one and the last one, but this one more specifically and more bluntly. Exodus chapter 20, verse 14, you shall not commit adultery. It's very interesting. The 6th commandment, you shall not murder. 7th commandment, you shall not commit adultery. There's a real sense in which that should be all that needs to be said. But it seems like we need to say more. And the truth is, this principle is a pretty specific principle, but as it is developed in the rest of the Old Law, then through the Old Testament, and then specifically in the New Testament, it is a broader principle that is not just marriage, but it is about sexual behavior in general. And so, Genesis chapter 2, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, right? God said that between the first man and woman in the Garden of Eden before the first sin. Marriage preserved as a gift for us after the sin and the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. God expects marriage to be kept holy. It is a gift from God to the first sinless people that He preserved even after their sin. But He expects it to be treated as holy. Jesus repeats it. God said it. Moses wrote it down. He wrote down Genesis 2. He wrote down Exodus 20. Then Matthew chapter 19, Matthew chapter 5, also in Mark and Luke. Jesus says the same thing. But in Matthew 19, they are no longer two, but they are one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. He is, and then he makes an exception for adultery. If a man divorces his wife except for the cause of unchastity and marries another woman, commits adultery. makes a special exception. Adultery becomes the only exception for dissolving a marriage and marrying again. Stated by God, written by Moses, confirmed by Jesus. And in Ephesians chapter 5, it's explained by Paul, where Paul explains that marriage pictures the relationship between Christ and the church. And to understand Christ's love for the church, to understand Christ's gift to the church, you need to understand a healthy marriage, because that's what God uses it as a picture from, that holy gift from the Garden of Eden. You better treat that as important. You better treat your marriage as important. You better treat your sexuality as a gift from God that must be kept holy. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Well, what if that woman is not an actual woman, but she's lights projected on a movie screen, or lights projected on a TV screen, or lights on a phone screen? You really think that question is difficult to answer? You think Jesus carved out exceptions for the digital age? Jesus is teaching us something about ourselves. He's teaching us something about the danger of sexual sin. He's teaching us something about the danger of allowing Satan into our hearts and into our minds through our physical desires. And if you want to be right with God, you have to protect this body that God has given to you. And one of the easiest ways for Satan to lead you away is sexual lust. Number 8, do not steal. Exodus chapter 20, verse 15. You shall not steal. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. But what you actually see is that God, in the 10 Commandments, the Big 10, instructs a respect for private property. What you have here is you have a foundation for an economic system that respects the productive activity of individuals and expects the collective to respect the productivity of an individual. And you are not allowed to take the productive efforts of that other person for your own use. You just can't take somebody else's property. And so there have been societies that try collectivist economic models of communism and socialism. Every one so far, abject failure. The Chinese are making a lot of progress by bringing in a lot of capitalism and trying to mix the two. But the fact of the matter is, if companies can't go to China and do business and keep the money that they make, they're not going to be doing business in China. And there's not going to be any forward momentum in their economy. It is a recipe for taking care of people's needs, respecting private property, respecting that people who labor deserve the fruits of their labor. You shall not muzzle the ox while it's treading out the grain, used in 1 Corinthians to talk about people who work for the church. Right? This principle gets bigger and bigger. Matthew chapter 6, verse 24 cautions us. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Your productive labor in those 6 days can make you think that the productivity of your labor is the purpose of life. That amassing wealth and gaining prosperity is the greatest good and the greatest sense of satisfaction in the world. It's wrong. It leads to heartache and heartbreak. It leads to divided families and misery and unhappiness. And Jesus instructs that. So God has a plan for us to participate in providing our own needs, but it always has to be balanced out with a recognition that He is God and that He is the only source of our peace, our security, our provision. And you can't serve both. If wealth becomes a god, you're in violation of one and probably two. Number 9, don't lie. This one sounds funny, and if you remember it from the King James, it may even be easy to misinterpret. And even in the New American Standard, it may be easy to misinterpret. Exodus chapter 20, verse 16, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That means don't testify to something that's not true. But, that doesn't mean that I can't tell him I think this horse is 4 years old when I know he's 14 years old. That's not in court. That's not me writing down anything, Or I can say, well, yeah, I think this car will take you another 100,000 miles, even though I know that, as soon as it goes, this special gas I put in there burns out, it's gonna start blowing smoke just like it was yesterday, right? No, it's a bigger principle than that. It's stated in a specific context, but then when you read the rest of the old law, you see that it's much larger than just in official documents and just in court. Proverbs chapter 6, verse 16, there are 6 things which the Lord hates, yes, 7 which are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. So a lying tongue, false witness, lies, all of these things. And see, this really goes back to that foundational truth in the first commandment. I am the Lord your God. God is the foundation of reality. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God creates reality. He creates truth. It is impossible for God to lie, says Titus. God who cannot lie. Truth is inseparable from God. The desire for truth is instructed and modeled and created by God. And so for a person who has a relationship with God, a person who travels in God's sphere, must respect that truth. John chapter 14, verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. John chapter 4, verse 24, God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. You shall not bear false witness, because God is a God of truth. And to be associated with God, you must be a person of truth, a person who is honest, a person who is trustworthy, a person who doesn't have to be asked to swear, a person who always says what's true and never says what's false. Lies are associated with God's enemy. John chapter 8, verse 44. You are of your father the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Little white lies are little Satan lies. Minor deceptions are Satan deceptions. Do you want to be associated with God? Do you want to be associated with Satan? Whether or not you are dedicated to the truth is a big reflection of your answer. Finally, number 10, do not covet. The other moral instructions, how to live with people in the 10 Commandments, can be reflected in some form or other in other ancient codes. The Code of Hammurabi, the Code of others have prohibitions against murder, prohibitions against theft, prohibitions against adultery. Nobody had a prohibition on coveting. Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, sex, and family again, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. This one is not an overt action. This is not a lie. This is not adultery. This is not murder. This is not taking care of your elderly parents. This is in the heart. This is a law for the inside of you. How you think, what you allow to infiltrate your mind. Coveting is being dissatisfied with what God has already given you and feeling that there is something wrong because of what God has not given you or has not given you yet. coveting is a form of criticizing God. It is a form of distrusting God, of saying to God that what he has done is not enough and is not right, just, or fair. Matthew chapter 7, verse 17, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. The heart that is open to coveting, the heart that is criticizing God and what God has decided to give to it, is a heart that is going to produce bad fruit. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Protect your heart. A lot of people say the Old Testament is just about the outside, it's just about the physical aspects. And when you get to Jesus' time, it seems like a lot of the people of his day sort of thought that. But it was never that way from God. It was always about your heart. And now we've been brought into the fullness. If you come to Luke chapter 12, verse 15, beware, be on your guard against every form of greed, for not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. If you're coveting, you're thinking about things and not about him. Romans 8, set your mind on the things of the Spirit, not on your possessions. Finally, I want to close with this. Exodus chapter 20, the people literally heard the voice of God. They heard God give the 10 commandments. A lot of people say, I'd love to see a sign. If God would just give me a sign, if God would just prove it to me. All the people perceived the thunder and the lightning flashes and the sound of the trumpet and the mountain smoking. When the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. And they said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen. But let not God speak to us or we will die. We don't want to hear from God anymore. This is too scary. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. May the fear of him remain with us, so that we may not sin. God bless you.